Let me check again. Yes, we are live. Go ahead, Ozan.
You should open it.
Mohan, thank you very much. Welcome to our series of interviews with the founders, entrepreneurs, and investors at Startup Istanbul. We have been doing for last 2 months, especially in this lockdown period all over the world. So we are very excited to host you today. And Elif and Ozan and me are online, and we will ask you some questions about your expectation and insights about the internet economy, especially the experience that you have, especially in Asia and also other geographies. And we would like to also hear about your entrepreneurship experience as well. Ozan?
Sure, thanks for having me here.
Welcome, Mohan. I've been reading and watching some stuff that you put online, and good that you're an internet entrepreneur, you're publishing. And I had maybe 8 years ago started Startup Grind in Istanbul, and I watched your Startup Grind talk as well. So I want to kind of start from that learnings and the tips I had from it. So you had a really different story where you had to go to San Francisco after you broke out with a girlfriend.
Yeah.
Breaking out, don't you think? Like, can you tell what on earth did you decide to go to San Francisco and Silicon Valley?
The opportunity was perfect, right? Like it was a bad personal experience. And then subsequently, it just so happened that I had the opportunity to go to spend an entire 1 full year in Silicon Valley. So the name of the program is called the NUS Overseas College.
Yeah.
And it is single-handedly actually responsible for like quite a lot of really amazing tech companies in Singapore. You know, companies like Carousel, 99.co. These are companies that have raised hundreds and millions of dollars. And that one program, right, actually has single-handedly done this. So on one hand, yes, I was trying to run away from Singapore. But on the other hand, like tech has always been something I've been interested in. My first actual trip to San Francisco was when I was 16. So this was a really good way, I felt, like to get my hands dirty in startups and tech, to go to the the mecca of it, right? So that's how it all started out.
And you really got your hands dirty because San Francisco is a pretty dirty place by itself anyway.
Yeah, it was not as bad before, but it's definitely been, I've heard it's gotten a bit worse.
Yeah, I came back last year. I lived there 3 years, and I completely agree. In my story, I was in Middle East. I was really literally next to Mecca, and then from one Mecca, I moved to the other one. So I really experienced. Well, looking back at it now, what are the top couple of things that gave you as a perspective and vision when you saw so many new things emerging from a technology perspective?
So a couple of things, right? Like for me, I knew for a fact that it was tech that would be driving the future, right? You know, if you want to be in an industry or a sector that is going to not just go towards the future, but actually make the future, technology would be it, right? It was really important at that point in time. I remember this was 2006, 2007. So I think people were a bit more driven towards doing good things with tech companies. It's a bit different now. Right. So I think, the whole great power comes with great responsibility, Spider-Man quote. I think that was very prevalent in that era. People knew that tech companies had the potential power to do really amazing things, and people wanted to make sure that that power was done for good. That was still the era where Google's "Don't be evil" mantra was still very active. Right. So I think those two things really stuck with me. And when I came back to Singapore and general Southeast Asia, it was always at the back of my mind that tech needs to be a force for doing good. Tech needs to be about helping people, about, it's not just about disruption, but helping people, come and be relevant in the new economy. Yeah. And tech was just a major way to super scale efforts and energies.
That's an interesting segue. I recently did a program with UNDP focusing on impact, which is much like you said, like technology creating social impact. And it's really interesting to hear your perspective, and that was how things were in Silicon Valley. Was it the same case when you went back to Asia Pacific? In Singapore? How was this?
So when we came back at that point of time, and this, mind you, is 2007, when Facebook wasn't even used
Right.
by people who were not in colleges. Very different world, very different era, right? So people just didn't understand it. People didn't see the value in it. They couldn't see the future or value in tech. People were still very happy using Friendster and MySpace,
Okay.
right? So in some sense, right, I think the initial struggles was for us to find like-minded people, for us to build a community of people that believed in wanting to build tech companies. And that's fundamentally how E27 started. It started
Exactly.
as a community, not as a company,
Yeah.
right? We were just a bunch of young, passionate students at that point in time, who had spent a year abroad in Silicon Valley and wanted to find a way to maintain that ethos and those cultural values.
Perfect.
And we were looking for like-minded people around, right?
But
So the
you,
hope, right, was that this community could actually create other companies. Maybe you could co-found a company with someone else. And in fact, a lot of the early E27 co-founders, there were about 20 over them, a lot of them have gone on to build amazing companies. One of them even sold his company to Zendesk
oh, nice.
before they went public. Yeah. So I think the core values that we started with are still prevalent today. And that has been what's been driving us all these years.
So looking back and the time you came back to Singapore, what were driving you not to find a job? Because I'm sure your parents were also not super happy when you came back from Silicon Valley saying, I'm going to create a blog. I'll be in tech. Why are you not a
Yeah.
banker? Why are you not doing this or that?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm very blessed because my parents have been very supportive throughout my entire life, right? And for them, the idea of starting a company is very counter culture to, studying hard, getting a degree, and getting a job. For context, right, my dad actually started his own business and did that for most of his life. But it was driven around the idea that having a business was meant to make money to feed the family,
Mhm.
right? You get a job so that you have some stability, and you don't have to work your ass off, right? But for me, it was a bit different because it was about doing something that I believed in. It was that passion. And it was also, I think, coincidental in some ways that when I graduated, it was in December 2008, kind of smack in the middle of the financial crisis. So while there were really no jobs around, the interesting thing was that a lot of people were looking at this opportunity to start companies. The government, the Singapore government, was actually giving out grants to people to start companies. And it just so happened that our value was higher because we could then talk about these companies. We were doing meetups for these organizations. So it became a kind of an opportune time for us to start in the middle of a financial crisis when everyone was kind of out of a job and looking for something to do or looking to build a company or looking to be involved in something interesting.
Well, I think that experience is also helping you to move along and be more resilient in this financial crisis or in this global crisis, let's say, not just financial.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate that this crisis is happening. No one wants it to happen, but the fact of the matter is that it has happened, and it's probably going to be with us for a while, right? And the true entrepreneurs thrive during this period, right? This is when they huckle down, they become the warrior CEOs. They drive their teams to innovate and do crazy things. And I think the ones that are really successful in doing that are going to win, right? You will see in 6 months, right, who the real winners are. I also feel that this is probably the best time to test out all the crazy ideas that you've put in your to-do list at the back burner that you've never been able to do in the past. Maybe because you're too busy scaling the existing business, or maybe you just don't have enough energy to focus on that. And especially for those people whose entire businesses have been disrupted, perfect time to try out new things, right? Some of the companies I've invested in are travel tech companies. Some are B2B grocery tech companies. A lot of them have pivoted. The travel tech companies have done completely different businesses. And for me, I feel that, look, at the end of the day, right, startups are about solving a problem and building a great team, right? And when you put those two things together, right, you can pretty much do anything. And in the early stages, which is right now for most of these companies, no one's going to blame you, right, for not getting it right? But if you don't try hard enough, if you don't pivot enough, if you don't try and figure things out, I think that's the true essence of failure.
So do you think that's a cultural, there's a cultural element in that resilience? Like when I was in I was living in San Francisco, the whole thing was like tiger moms from Asia and the startups from Asia. Oh, much like startups from outside of US had that much resilient, much stubborn, no, I'm not going to fall. And if I fall, I'm going to fall forward. I'm going to keep on moving. As if some real tiger is chasing them. They have kind of different mindset. How much of it do you think is culture?
I think to a certain extent it is, right? I read a paper a long time ago about the American upbringing versus the Chinese upbringing, right? And if you look at the Chinese side, the analogy they have is like rice farming, where you have to put in a lot of hours over a long period of time before you really see the fruits. So it's slow, sluggish work, which they said that actually correlates to why Chinese people are so good at math. It's not because they're smarter, it's because they're a lot more resilient. They're willing to tackle the problem a lot harder, and they're willing to try whatever it takes to make it work. And I think culturally, yeah, that does make sense, right? In Southeast Asia, the deeper problem has always been the aspect of failure, right? I mean, in the past, and I think with most countries in the world, failure has been a big thing, right? So what most people do is that they either shy away from talking about their problems, or they shy away from trying out different things completely. You know, I would think that in the past, founders would be afraid to go to their company and say, hey, what we've tried doesn't work. We need to try something else. But now I think that's different, right? I would say, in fact, founders now have the best excuse to fail because they can just blame it on the virus, right? It's like, I'm sorry, you know, it's not that the business didn't work or the virus effect. But to me, right, like that's the perfect excuse again to try something else. That notion of failure is definitely changing, where people are more open and receptive towards people sharing about their what didn't work, and people definitely respecting you for sharing that. But I think at the end of the day, founders need to figure a way out of the problem. You can't just say, you know, it doesn't work and fail and not do anything about it. What people want to know is that, okay, if it doesn't work, what's the next step? What's the
plan? I think that's a good segue to what I had in mind to ask later. So this whole new, trying new, getting new, opening up new markets. Have you seen an increase in startups with a global passion coming out of the Asia Pacific after the crisis, or is it more like, because you're kind of watching, you're at the what we call the water hole, you see everything that comes in. Are they looking more inward to their region because it's easier to conquer, or are they seeing the global opportunity? Let's just be a little bit more braver and go abroad. Well, how do you see that?
I think Southeast Asia startups have definitely been more on the regional side. It depends on the market. So if you go from market to market, it changes a bit, right? So if you go to Indonesia, for example, right, and just generally speaking, a lot of the companies are very inward focused because the Indonesian market is huge, right? There's a lot of opportunity, right? And with the inward focus come a different set of challenges, right? So for example, right, if you wanted to build a service that was able to be relevant to tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities, right? The approach you have towards the problems are different. You need to cater the technology maybe to work with lower end phones and lower end connections. You might also need to do a better job of onboarding. Maybe you need a bit more language localization. With a regional focus, it's a bit different. You can target tier 1 cities across the entire region, Bangkok, Manila, Jakarta. So the way you approach growth is a bit different. So I think it really depends on the geography that a lot of these companies are at, and their go-to-market strategy. Like the two classic unicorns in Southeast Asia are Grab and Gojek, which are the Uber equivalents. And I think Grab has taken the model of regionalizing first and then localizing after, whereas Gojek has done a good job of really deeply localizing in Indonesia. I don't think there's a right or wrong here, but I think in the long term you'll get to see which ones play out. I don't personally think a lot of the Southeast Asia companies are going global because, to be honest, right, the opportunities that exist for them regionally are more definitely easier for them to tackle. They're probably a lot more difficult for a US player to look at versus them. So to give you a simple example, one of the more popular companies, Shopback, which is a rebates platform, they've been expanding regionally, and just recently they acquired a company in Korea. So for them, it would have made more sense to be the dominant player in this region because there already exist big players in the US and other sectors, and make sure that they localize and be really, really good in every one of these markets versus looking abroad.
So I think before I moved to US, I was also in Middle East, and we had almost the same discussions. And that also that has a advantage and a disadvantage. One of the advantages is you have a really clear exit path, because once you conquer your region, then every other global player who wants to have a growth percentage or who wants to tackle that side of the world will come and grab you out. Same story happened with Karim. A lot of the same story would happen with the e-commerce deals that happened in Middle East that are billion-dollar value companies. Do you see that as the primary exit path, like being acquired by larger tech companies, or do you also see local holdings in Singapore and Asia or in China looking forward to diversify their interests and doing M&As rather than startup acquisitions?
Yeah, so I think in the early days, the aspiration was to be acquired, right? And that's also because the funding infrastructure wasn't that huge, right? But if you look at today, right, I think like Ninja Van, which is a last mile logistics company, they raised, I believe, $280 million. I think it was just announced last week or the week before. And when you talk to them, right, their aspirations is to go public. And it's something maybe that they might not have been more public about in the past, or they might not have aspired to, but today they do, right? If you look at Grab and Gojek, these two companies have been acquiring companies regionally, right? Gojek just finalized a acquisition of a POS company. They acquired like a bank/payments company in Philippines not too long ago. So it's the larger unicorns that are on the acquisition spree regionally. A lot of it is for equity hires, but in some cases it's also to get local market access or certain access to licenses, right? But I think for a lot of founders, there's definitely a bigger appetite and there's definitely a bigger ambition now to go public. If you look at Garena, or now it's called a C Group, right? They're Nasdaq listed. They went public a few years ago, and their stock market has been doing really well because their e-commerce platform Shopee has been absolutely killing it in this part of the world. So I think those kind of examples have been good inspirations for a lot of these companies.
And I think one driver for that, as you mentioned, is the availability of funding. And Singapore had been doing a great job in being the hub for a lot of the venture capital industry. A lot of the headquarters most of them are in Singapore. And I think there's a clear difference between Singapore-based VCs and China-based VCs. And also that's been very interesting to observe. What do you think about that?
I think the Chinese investors that have been active in Southeast Asia have mainly been the bigger companies, the Alibabas and the Tencents, right? I think Tencent was probably the biggest winner regionally in Southeast Asia in the early days. And for the investor side, I think most of the investors in Southeast Asia, the Chinese type investors, have primarily been like the early founders of some of the larger tech firms, the Alibaba equivalents, right? And a lot of them have done quieter deals that are not that public, either co-investments with existing VCs or even in some cases just doing deals on their own, right? There's even been one VC in Singapore that is well known to be like a partner VC for a lot of the rich Chinese tech entrepreneurs. I don't think it's a good or bad kind of thing, the Chinese versus money versus the Singapore money. It kind of really depends on your strategy, what kind of mentorship access you want to have and stuff like that. Because there's a lot of benefits to having Chinese money, because a lot of the business models, a lot of the kind of companies that were built in China are being built in Southeast Asia. So there's a lot of models that to replicate and learn from, right? And I mean, having relationships with China does help in some ways, potentially for M&A opportunities or for market expansion opportunities.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And one thing that I'm curious is, a lot of the companies that I've seen around the world in Middle East, Turkey, and US have an idea of some of them have been brave enough to vision themselves operating in China or going into the Chinese market. But I keep telling them, even a lot of the Asian startups who have borders with China don't attempt to go to the Chinese market very early on, because yes, it's a big market, but it also can consume your efforts because it's completely different dynamics.
Correct.
How easy is it to attempt to get into the Chinese market, or is there examples that you would like to share what that worked before?
There are like, for example, there are some organizations that have penetrated the Chinese market. I mean, one of the startups I invested in ended up doing business in China. The challenge is, of course, things like bringing money out, the copycat issues, legal issues, and all that. So I think for China, right, if you want to do well in China, you have to be very well capitalized, because China is not one country, right? It's probably 30 over countries in one. So you have to take every market as one funding batch. So if you want to go for the full market, you at least have to raise like in the hundreds of millions of dollars, that kind of level, before you approach China. The second thing is, I think you really, really need very strategic investment or very strategic local partnership in order to be successful in China. I mean, you forget the startups. If you look at the big guys alone, right? You look at the Apples and the Disneys, the way they've approached, even Facebook, right? The way they've approached China, there's a lot to learn from them. Li Kai-fu, the AI superpowers, the guy who wrote AI superpowers. I think he was the guy running Google in China very early on. That book was a huge eye opener for me, because he basically explained, right, a couple of things, right? One, China is really, really good at copying, yes, but not just blatantly copying. They're very, very good at copying, but amazingly, radically well localizing it, right? And two, you have to approach China with a different lens. So eBay didn't take off in China, despite having a lot of money and smart people tackling the problem, because they did not want to build for the Chinese audience.
Yes.
Right. They wanted to build a US product and bring it to China, which doesn't work. So you have to think of it as you're literally building a completely different company.
Yeah.
Right, for China. So you need the capital to do that, you need the team to do that, you need the partners to do that, and you also need the cultural mindset to do that.
Yes.
And if you think you have all of these, maybe visiting China and tackling that place might be worth it. But it's tremendously difficult. Then that doesn't mean coming to Southeast Asia is going to be easy, though, because Southeast Asia is 650 million people, 11 countries, so many different languages, cultures. It's radically different as well.
So, do you think is it? Well, you can't do a half-ass work in going to a new market, anyways. So you need to find out how to be a partner for in different startups and different companies, and you have to have a really good knowledge of the ecosystem, which E27 is providing that kind of up-to-date information that you can keep doing it. But one of the factors that got really hit after this, positively and negatively, is the publishing, entertainment and content business. And before we went live, we were talking about how you're using this opportunity to rethink the product development side of things. And even from a business model, you're changing a lot in a short amount of time. What are the plans going like, and how did the pandemic have the impact on this?
Yeah, so we've always looked at ourselves as a tech and startup ecosystem platform, right? And that was the vision originally, right? We used content as a way to start that process, because it was just a very quick and easy way to do it. And then events was the natural next step, because once you build an audience, there's that face-to-face connection, sponsorship money and revenue is an easy way to make money. Media and advertising wasn't that prevalent in the early days. So events was an easy next step. Now, what the pandemic or COVID-19 really helped us do is to completely kill off the ability to do events, which means that we can then focus on bringing value to our ecosystem on the online side. So we were able to look at what worked well on the event side and figure out ways to replicate some aspects of that online. So to give you a simple example, right, something that we do at Echelon every year is this top 100 program where we bring together the best companies from around the region, and then we matchmake them to investors, to corporates, right? That's like the flagship highlight thing that a lot of companies look forward to, usually at the start of the year when we open applications.
Yeah.
And so when we killed off Echelon, we said, okay, what can we do with this segment first? Can we find a way to replicate that experience online? And that's how we approached it. Let's start to productize, digitize all our offline activities and slowly put them online, right? So we've started doing startup and investor matchmaking programs. We've started building features on the site where the ecosystem aspect of it gets a bit more prominent, where they can put widgets and information about them fundraising and stuff like that. And we're constantly talking to our user base, right? Hey, startups, tell us what can we do better? What can we build next that's relevant to you? And we always do it at a price point that is cheap enough, right, that the regional companies can take advantage of, not just the companies in Singapore.
Okay, so it's the monetization model is probably subscription and maybe year-long subscriptions.
Yeah, it's a yearly membership model.
Membership model.
Yeah, we actually don't charge for content, and there's no immediate plans to, because we have a unique model where half of our content is actually generated by the community.
Okay.
Right. So not entirely by us. So I think if we put a paywall on that, it might be a bit tricky. But we believe content is a way that we want to keep it free and open. It's a way for us to engage our ecosystem a bit better. And it's also a good way for the ecosystem to build thought leadership, right? So anybody, listening in this chat, yourself included, if you think you want to write about the vertical that you're in, the challenges that you face as a founder or your company, then you're completely free to do so.
Perfect. So going to the rapid changes in the industries, you said you had travel companies who are impacted and are now pivoting to something else. Offline businesses like conferences, events are pivoting to something else. Yeah. Do you think this is going to, a lot of the discussion I think is now, especially since this is in the mid phases in the US, a lot of people are saying, oh, we're going to wait and see, and this is going to go back to normal. Whereas in this part of the world, we kind of know it's not going to go back to normal anytime soon. So we have been through this, especially Asia had been through multiple different versions of smaller health crises. And you have more experience in seeing how things bounce back after MERS, after SARS. And now, what's your vision on how things will move back after COVID-19?
So there's going to be a new normal, right? I don't think life is ever going to be the same again. I think travel is going to get a lot more expensive. The idea of free travel and cheap holidays might not come back for a very long time, right? The travel industry will have to phenomenally change to get itself ready for COVID-19 type situations, right? Security is going to be a big problem. I think the very nature between the relationship you have with your government is also going to change. Because now you need to be a lot more accountable of the activities that you do, the people that you meet, how you spend your time, right? I think there's really going to be a fundamental change regionally, globally, right, with respect to this new pandemic era. Now, the thing is, how can companies then adapt to take advantage of that change and help organizations live through that change, right? And I think that's where the opportunity lies. If it's going to be more difficult to do businesses, for example, in an offline setting, how can you bring that experience online, right? In the past, especially with events, right? I always say that events are a time and space problem, where if you put together a great event, but I just cannot attend it because of whatever time reasons, I lose out on such a massive opportunity. But with virtual events now, a lot more people can take advantage of it. So in some sense, I think a lot of the inefficiencies that existed in the previous era, inefficiencies with travel and time, are going to start to go away because of the nature of people being more comfortable and open to using online tools for communication. In some sense, I think relationships might even get stronger, right? People are going to value family, value being at home, value spending quality time with people a lot more. And hopefully that builds a bit more empathy in the world. Now, from a business standpoint, I think this is a huge opportunity for tech, right? You're going to realize that tech, the need for security, the need for authentication and all that is going to be even more prevalent. I think health tech is going to be a massive space that is going to grow. especially since people will want to make sure that they are healthy and not just physically but mentally as well during these challenging situations. Education, I've seen some really interesting things happening in edutech. I have a nephew at home, and I can clearly see that schools are not ready for this era. So finding ways or solutions to help children be educated for the future, I think is going to be very critical. And I mean, the list goes on, right? Food tech, there's people are talking about a global food supply chain crisis. So it's going to be a big issue as well. There's the logistics aspects of things, the last mile delivery, the use of drones for surveillance. There's so many amazing things that can happen thanks to, in some sense, thanks to COVID-19. But we do also have to realize that really things are never going to be the same again, right? We as a species have to adapt for the new normal. The faster we accept that, the better it is for all of us.
I think that's a brilliant point, because having lived in multiple cultures and multiple places, the more I speak with people in that side of the world in the US, they're like, oh, well, things will go back to what they were in a couple of years. I was like, okay, but what will happen in that couple of years is going to change what will happen in the following years.
Yeah.
Whether in this side of the world, we are more like evaluating the situation much effectively and much proactively, saying, no, let's get ready for something completely different. And if things go back to normal, we already know how to deal with that. But if things don't go back to normal, we should actually have a better plan to move things ahead, and with the impact of the technology. And that ties to the initial reason why we were mentioning a lot of the technology was focused on creating impact as well, which we had kind of lost in the last 15, 20 years. But now a lot of the teams that I have been dealing with is focusing on real problems, not copycats of copycats of copycats.
Yeah. Because I think at the end of the day, right, in a challenging situation like this globally, right, you want to provide stuff of value and you want to help people out. It's just natural that you want to feel that there's an impact that you want to give back to society, or there's something that you want to help make the world a better place, naively, right, in some sense. I think this is an era where maybe making money or being famous might not be on everyone's mind. It could be a byproduct of you doing good work, right? But fundamentally, what people want to do now is to say, hey, how can I play my part during this era? How can I help? And if you think about it, right, even like during the World War II era, right, a lot of people were involved in the war somewhat, not at the front lines, but at the back, right? Either it was making weapons, sewing uniforms, supplying food, and Silicon Valley was, in some sense, if you watch the Steve Black documentary on YouTube, Silicon Valley was born because of World War II. Yeah, a lot of the early technologies at Bell Labs and all that was because of the need for the war, right? And I think a similar thing could potentially happen, right? The same way that the world was changed back then in terms of democratization and global trade, and those were positive changes. But I'm sure there were a lot of people back then who didn't like those changes. I think the same logic could apply today, right? The very fact that maybe diseases will go down, security will be a bit higher, the world might actually be a much safer place, right? Quality of life might actually go up thanks to health standards. Health standards might actually improve. Investment in overall health tech and healthcare has gone down over the past few years, right? But maybe now it's time when a bit more money is funneled to those areas. And hopefully maybe people start to realize that they need to take care of their mental and physical health. And that ideally maybe makes the world have a lot happier people, I think.
And us as a different species going forward. So I hope so. I'm with that positive. So going to a little bit of the practical side of doing business or expanding in the region, if you were a startup, let's say in Turkey or in Middle East or in Europe, that's eyeing on a large market like the Asian market or ASEAN market, and you're looking, I'll try my chances in raising funds from Singapore. Maybe I'll create a headquarters in Singapore.
Yeah.
How would you define that blueprint? What will be the first couple of steps that they will need to do in order to get that aspiration and get that in action?
So I think the very first thing that needs to happen, right, is that you need to at least have a basic understanding of the local landscape, the investment landscape, what are investors investing in, what are the kind of companies they want to invest in, right? That for that you actually need to spend time talking to the right people, potentially reading the right resources. And if COVID wasn't a situation, right, you need to probably be spending a bit more time in the local market.
Yeah.
I don't think it's impossible, but if you don't actually spend some time here for a while, it's going to be challenging, right? Because investors want to be investing with people whom they know are going to be in that region for the long haul or for the longer term, right? So that's the very first thing to think about, right? The second thing to think about is whether you could do a local partnership, a local JV, or collaborate with certain local organizations that potentially help you go to market a bit quicker, or at least help you understand the local ecosystem better. For Indonesia, in fact, that's actually a very big thing now, right? For most non-Indonesian companies that want to go to Indonesia, a local partnership or a local JV is a very critical way to start. If you don't have that, the likelihood of being successful is quite low, right? So that's something to also consider. Yeah, finding that local group. And the last thing is that if you really do take the plunge, potentially finding a local GM supplemented by someone from your current team overseas, and making sure that that the current person that joins from overseas is fully vested in wanting to be a local person is very, very critical, right? You need to eat, breathe, and live the culture,
Yeah.
right? And the more people realize that, hey, this guy's willing to eat the local food, take the local public transport and be local, right, to learn how to do things, the faster it is, the better it is for all of them.
And I think the people are thinking, oh, there's lots of money from Chinese investors, or there's lots of VCs in Singapore. Yeah, there might be availability of funding, but there is not a shortage of startups to fund, and they're not expecting international startups to come over without getting the preparation ready, without looking for the local contextualization and finding the right people to run the companies with.
Well, so the thing is, in for most of the funds, right, the mandate is not to invest outside of the region.
Yeah.
Right. Unless it's extremely strategic, a US kind of company. In most cases, the Southeast Asia funds only invest in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
There are many Indonesian investors who don't invest outside of Indonesia. So if you might be a great company in Singapore, but if you're not doing business in Indonesia, they will not even consider investing in you.
Sure.
So it's not so straightforward that just because there's money here, it's easy to get, right? In most cases, I think, right, what they would, at the bare minimum, they would expect your round to be maybe led by your local investor. And maybe if they really, really like you, if they have an amazing introduction from someone they know about you, they might consider doing a bit of a follow-on investment. But if you think, I think it's challenging to come here and expect to raise a good amount of money led by a local investor really quickly if you don't have those basic fundamentals set in place.
I think where there's representation of a larger region like Middle East, Asian, that is true for most of the places because they want to have a local impact as well, as we discussed, and they want to have a close view on how they're going because they can help you move forward. But if you're sitting somewhere else completely and only trying to come to the region to fundraise and go back to where you are, that does not work. A lot of the companies that reached out to me when I was in the Middle East saying, oh, we want to fundraise from Middle East. And my question was, okay, what's the market like? How did you study? What are you going to do with the first round? Oh, we don't know yet. So do the work, get to know the people. Back then it was easier to travel, as you said. But one of the regional friends that we have in common with Burak is Ray, that does STEP conferences in the Middle East. And again, he's also, he kept saying the same things. You have to be here to be able to fundraise from here, to be able to do business here. You just don't fly over, get money, and go back. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. I mean, the same logic lies with raising money in the US or even raising money in China, right? Yeah. Unless you go for like accelerator programs where you're raising a very small ticket size, like your YC equivalents, then that's a different thing. But if you're talking about like say a real round, right, like a Series A type round, it's very, very challenging to do that.
And what would be your top like 3-4 accelerators that for early stage startups to look into?
For this region or globally?
For this region, for Asia.
I think for this region, I mean, definitely MOX, right? I think MOX is a very well known, very well reputable accelerator that has presence in large parts of this region. They've done a lot of demo days. The kind of companies they invest in are very interesting in terms of like the deep tech. And they have a very large global footprint. So if you wanted to look at, getting partners or maybe co-investors from around the world, I think MOX is one investor or one accelerator it is really, really helpful for companies.
I have one last question before going to the YouTube questions, which is I worked in a large university, and the president of the university was the former president of NUS. And his vision was universities has to do a lot more in putting investment into innovation. How do you see the role of universities and research playing out in the Asian market?
So I think my alma mater, right, NUS, National University of Singapore, NUS Enterprise is probably one of the prime examples of what a university should do to facilitate industry development, right? So the first thing that NUS did is to ensure that their student community is passionate about entrepreneurship, and that's where the NUS Overseas College program came about. So that was the program I was on. So they didn't just have the collaboration with Silicon Valley, they actually had it with 10 or even maybe more universities around the world, right? So this was in partnership with local universities as well as the local companies. So to give you context, right, they had it in places like Stockholm, China, Israel, Silicon Valley, all over the world, right? So that early seed where the university bears the cost for these was very valuable. The second thing is that I think the universities can also provide early fundings for student entrepreneurship or research entrepreneurship, research type entrepreneurs that want to build companies. NUS as well is they're one of the probably more well-known under the radar investors for a lot of these very successful companies. And in most cases, right, they've deployed the capital and then used their university networks, their global partnerships, sometimes in fact their research arms to help bring value. I think the industry liaison office that tries to do commercialization of tech, usually that's very, very challenging. And unless there is a very active joint effort between private and the university research arm, it's very hard for that to happen. So for NUS side, they've been doing conferences and a lot of collaborations globally to show people the technology they have. But generally speaking, that's where it's a tough part. The last one, I think, right, is in terms of academia, which is to figure out how to be relevant with what's important in the world today. Right. So making sure that the curriculum, the courses, tailoring the kind of material and the format of these materials to be relevant to the student community is very, very critical, right? And making sure that the information is more openly available online and even to maybe even students outside, like what Harvard and Stanford have done, I think is very, very important.
I agree. So Burak, you want to go with the question?
There is a question from YouTube audience. What's your thought about OYO and Red Doors in South Asian market? Which one has better chances to steer through this pandemic and come out strong?
So I'm not entirely familiar with the South Asian market because I spend most of my time in Southeast Asia, right? Generally speaking, I think a lot of the Indian startups are very well capitalized. They've been able to raise a lot of money the last years and expand very, very quickly. I think the challenge for a lot of these guys is to either figure out how to cut losses in certain areas that don't seem to be doing well. So to make sure that they don't get market share just for the in most cases they're losing money just holding a lot of these assets, or to start pivoting to other areas that could be relevant to them. So I think for OU and Windows specific, right? Say they try to be the cheap Airbnb or the cheaper hotel groups in the region, and since travel is completely gone, I think for them it's probably the strategy for now is probably wiser for them to reduce them as quickly as they can, raise some intermediate capital so that they can last out the pandemic, then ideally try and restructure some of the assets to be used for maybe not travel related reason, but maybe office type reasons or so to be honest, it's probably quite tough for them, but I think they need to radically rethink their entire business.
I agree.
Mohan, also, my question is, what is the strategy? I mean, what do you think about the Softbank strategy all over the globe and especially coming from Asia? Do you have any comments or kinds of?
I think Softbank has kind of drunk their own Kool-Aid too much. They have overvalued assets that they think are highly valued. I mean, WeWork is a classic example. I think they probably just haven't done a good job as an investor in general. And I think it's time for a lot of soul searching for them. I think SoftBank is a classic example of what happens if venture capital just goes too fast, too far, right? Where with the amount of money they have and the pressure that they put on companies to get that money. There's a famous story where Masa told Anthony, right, that if you don't take my money, it's not good for you, along that lines, right? And the pressure that a lot of these companies have to raise to take that money, right? I don't think that bodes well for venture capital in general. The problem with the venture capital industry also is that because a lot of these companies are private, there's no accountability. And that's where I used to be of the kind that I used to wonder why should companies go public. But now I realize that actually going public is a lot more helpful to shareholders in general. It's a lot more helpful to the markets and the globe in general. Because if you look at like the Uber drivers, the Grab drivers globally, a lot of them are suffering, right? And they can't keep Uber and Grab accountable in this process because they're private companies. So if they were public companies, like how Uber is and how the share price is tanking, right? The accountability and the need for them to be better, be doing business better and more fairly, that happens a lot more.
Mohan, thank you very much. And my last question is, for the last 2 months, have you done any foods in kitchen?
Oh yeah. So I don't cook, I'm the kind of guy that I can barely even boil water, right? Like it's a joke, right? So my partner laughs at me all the time when it comes to this. But I made it my personal thing, and I'm sure a lot of people have to just learn how to cook a bit. So I made a bit of pasta. I tried to learn how to make like homemade sourdough pizza. It turned out not too bad. But I think I realized I'm someone who prefers ordering food in and going to a restaurant as opposed to making my own meals, because I noticed by the time I finish the meal, I've actually lost my appetite. And I thought something was wrong with me, right? But actually my friends told me that it's a very common thing.
It is.
I didn't realize that. Yeah. So I just realized cooking is something I've always wanted to do. But after doing it, I realized, it's just not my thing, unfortunately.
That's exactly why I lost 5 kilos in this whole lockdown. I'm cooking like crazy, but by the time I'm done, I go and I look at the mess I create in the kitchen. I go like, I need to clean this fridge before I eat. So I eat much than I actually would have if I was able to just bring me food, bring me more food.
Makes sense. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Ozan, Mohan, thank you very much for this nice interview and also lots of insights. And hope to see you, Mohan, in Istanbul after these outbreaks complete, hopefully. And thank you very much again.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I'll write a blog about our discussion and post it on E27, and then we'll see how it goes.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the day for you guys. See you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.